Late on a quiet afternoon inside Alton Baker Park, a man was kneeling over an unconscious woman performing CPR. Several people nearby had already pulled out their phones, watching nervously as he tried to keep her alive. But one person watching that scene didn't see a rescue attempt. She saw something else entirely. Within seconds, she dialed 911 and told dispatch that a black man was attacking a white woman in the park. Less than a minute later, two police cruisers pulled hard along the edge of the park path. Their doors flew open, and Officer Scott Hollenbeck was already pulling his gun as he ran toward Stephen Smith. If you care about stories that expose real moments of injustice like this one, take a second to subscribe and follow the channel. These stories matter, and every detail you're about to hear is part of what makes them impossible to ignore. The man kneeling on the pavement was Stephen Smith, a 38-year-old cardiologist who lived and worked in Eugene. Saving lives wasn't new to him. It was literally his job. That afternoon, Stephen wasn't at the hospital. He was doing something simple, walking his Belgian Malinois mix, Atlas, along one of the paved trails that cut through the park. Witnesses later said it looked like a completely normal afternoon. Joggers passed by, cyclists rode along the path, and people walked their dogs under the trees. That's when the emergency happened. A woman running along the trail suddenly slowed, stumbled, and collapsed face first onto the pavement. Her name was Lauren Taylor. Stephen saw it happen from only a few yards away. He immediately tied Atlas's leash to a nearby bench and rushed toward her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" he said as he knelt beside her. There was no response. Stephen checked for breathing. Nothing. Years of medical training took over instantly. He positioned his hands in the center of her chest and began compressions. 1, 2, 3. A few nearby joggers stopped. Someone gasped. "Is she breathing?" a man asked without looking up. "No," Stephen answered without looking up. "Call 911. Tell them she's unresponsive." Most people watching saw exactly what was happening. A man trying to save a stranger's life. But one woman standing several yards away saw something different. Her name was Carolyn Rhodes. Instead of moving closer to understand the situation, she pulled out her phone and began dialing. Her voice on the call was tense, but the words were clear. "Yes, I need police right now," she told the dispatcher. "There's a black man on top of a white woman in the park." She glanced again toward Stephen, pressing his hands rhythmically against Lauren Taylor's chest. "I think he's trying to force himself on her," she added. Back on the pavement, Stephen kept counting compressions. 27, 28, 29. He had no idea someone had just reported him as a criminal. But he was about to find out, because less than a minute after that call, two police cruisers pulled up hard along the edge of the park path. Their doors flew open, and Officer Scott Hollenbeck was already pulling his gun as he ran toward Stephen Smith. The moment his boots hit the pavement, he raised the weapon and shouted, "Hey, get off her! Hands up now!" The command echoed across the trail inside Alton Baker Park. Stephen looked up for half a second, confused, sweat running down his face as he continued pressing his hands against Lauren Taylor's chest. "She's not breathing," Stephen said quickly. "I'm doing CPR." But Officer Scott Hollenbeck didn't slow down. He kept the gun aimed directly at Stephen's head. "I said, get off her!" he shouted again. Stephen shook his head while continuing compressions. "If I stop, she could die." Behind Hollenbeck, the second officer, Tyler Babcock, rushed in from the side. He didn't stop to check Lauren Taylor either. His eyes were locked on Stephen. "What's going on here?" Babcock demanded. "He's assaulting her," Hollenbeck said immediately. Several witnesses reacted at once. "That's not true," one jogger yelled. "He's helping her," another woman shouted, but the officers ignored them. Stephen tried again, speaking quickly between compressions. "Officer, she collapsed. I'm a doctor. She needs—" Before he could finish, Hollenbeck stepped closer and pointed the gun even lower toward him. "Don't move another inch," he snapped. "You think I'm stupid?" Stephen froze for half a second, stunned. "She's in cardiac arrest," he said firmly. "If I stop CPR, she—" "Step away from her," Hollenbeck barked. Stephen looked down at Lauren Taylor's motionless body. Every second mattered. If he stopped now, her chances of survival dropped fast. So he kept going. 31, 32. That decision made Officer Tyler Babcock move. Without warning, Babcock pulled a canister from his belt and sprayed a burst of pepper spray directly into Stephen's face. The reaction was immediate. Stephen recoiled, coughing violently as the burning chemical filled his eyes and throat. "What the—" he gasped, stumbling backward. The compression stopped. Lauren Taylor lay motionless on the ground. Babcock didn't hesitate. He charged forward and slammed into Stephen from the side, tackling him hard onto the pavement. Atlas, still tied to the nearby bench, began barking loudly. Witnesses shouted in shock. "What are you doing?" a man yelled. "He was helping her," another woman screamed. Stephen struggled to breathe as his face burned from the pepper spray. "She needs CPR," he choked out. "You have to keep—" Babcock forced his arm behind his back. "Stop resisting," the officer shouted. "I'm not resisting," Stephen said through coughing. Officer Scott Hollenbeck stepped closer, still holding the gun. "Nice act, real convincing." Stephen stared up at him through watering eyes. "I'm telling you, she's not breathing." For the first time since arriving, Hollenbeck glanced briefly toward Lauren Taylor lying on the pavement. She still hadn't moved. No one was helping her. And now Stephen Smith's hands were being forced into handcuffs. Just as the metal cuffs snapped shut around his wrists, sirens could be heard approaching the park. Paramedics were arriving, and one of them was about to recognize exactly who the officers had just arrested. Sirens grew louder along the edge of Alton Baker Park. Officer Tyler Babcock forced Stephen Smith flat against the pavement, pressing a knee into his back while tightening the handcuffs around his wrists. Stephen's eyes were burning from the pepper spray. Every breath felt like fire in his throat. "I told you," he coughed, struggling to speak. "She needs CPR." "Save it," Babcock snapped, shoving Stephen's shoulder harder into the ground. Nearby, Lauren Taylor still hadn't moved. Her body remained exactly where she had collapsed on the walking path. One of the witnesses stepped forward. "Officer, she's not breathing," the man shouted. "He was helping her." Officer Scott Hollenbeck immediately turned his head toward the crowd. "Everyone back up, now." But the crowd didn't move. Several people had their phones raised, recording everything. A woman pointed toward Lauren Taylor. "She collapsed while running," she said. "That man ran over and started CPR right away." Hollenbeck's jaw tightened. Funny how that works. Guy just happens to be on top of her. Stephen lifted his head slightly, despite Babcock's weight on his back. "I wasn't on top of her. I was performing compressions." Babcock grabbed Stephen's arm and yanked him up roughly to his knees. "You're done talking," he said. Stephen looked past them toward Lauren Taylor, lying motionless. No one was helping her. "Check her pulse," Stephen pleaded. "She's in cardiac arrest." "Yeah, sure. That your new excuse?" Hollenbeck said. Atlas continued barking from the bench where Stephen had tied him. The sound echoed across the trail. Another witness shouted from the crowd, "Why aren't you helping her?" But the officers stayed focused on Stephen. Babcock pulled him to his feet and began walking him toward the patrol car parked at the edge of the trail. Stephen stumbled as he walked, still coughing. "She needs compressions," he repeated. "If you stop CPR for this long—" "Enough," Hollenbeck said sharply. At that moment, the ambulance rolled onto the park path. Two paramedics jumped out and rushed toward Lauren Taylor. The moment they reached her, one of them immediately dropped to his knees and checked her airway. "She's not breathing," the medic said urgently. The second paramedic quickly began chest compressions. Across the path, Stephen watched helplessly as they worked. Officer Babcock pushed him toward the patrol car. "Sit down," he ordered. Stephen didn't resist. He sat on the curb, his wrists still cuffed behind his back, eyes red from the pepper spray. Across the scene, one of the paramedics suddenly looked up. His eyes locked on Stephen. For a moment, he just stared. Then his expression changed completely. "Hold on," he said, stepping closer. He pointed directly at Stephen Smith. "Why is Dr. Stephen Smith in handcuffs?" The question stopped several people in their tracks. The paramedic who had spoken, Nolan Velez, was standing over Lauren Taylor, who was still lying motionless on the path inside. His partner continued compressions. 32, 33. Velez looked again toward Stephen sitting on the curb, his hands cuffed behind his back, eyes red from the pepper spray. "You've got to be kidding me," Velez muttered. Officer Scott Hollenbeck frowned. "You know him?" he asked. Velez stepped closer, clearly irritated. "Yeah," he said. "He's a cardiologist." The word hung in the air. Stephen looked up, still breathing heavily. "Nolan," he said hoarsely. "She collapsed while running. No pulse. I started compressions immediately." Velez nodded once. "That's exactly what I figured." Officer Tyler Babcock crossed his arms. "Yeah," he said sarcastically. "Well, when we got here, he was on top of her." Several witnesses immediately reacted. "He was doing CPR," a woman shouted. "You guys sprayed him," another man yelled. Velez turned back toward the crowd. "You pepper-sprayed the guy doing CPR?" Neither officer answered immediately. Behind them, Velez's partner continued working on Lauren Taylor. "Still no pulse," the medic called out. Velez turned and immediately dropped beside her. "Switch," he said. He took over compressions, his movements quick and controlled. "Come on, stay with us," he muttered under his breath. Across the path, Stephen leaned forward slightly from the curb. "How long was CPR stopped?" he asked. Velez glanced over briefly. "Couple minutes." Stephen exhaled slowly. "That's not good." Hollenbeck shifted uncomfortably. "You're saying he actually knows what he's doing?" Velez looked at him sharply. "He's a cardiologist. His entire job is literally the heart." The surrounding crowd had grown larger now. More phones were recording. Several people began talking loudly among themselves. "You guys arrested the man trying to save her. This is insane. You left her on the ground." Officer Babcock turned toward the crowd. "Everyone step back," he said firmly. But the tone had changed. People weren't backing away anymore. Across the scene, the paramedics continued working. "Clear!" one of them shouted. The defibrillator delivered a shock. Lauren Taylor's body jerked slightly. Everyone watched. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the monitor beeped. A faint rhythm appeared. "She's got a pulse," the medic said. A wave of murmurs spread through the crowd. Stephen closed his eyes briefly in relief. Velez immediately began preparing Lauren for transport. "Let's move," he said. As they lifted the stretcher, he looked once more toward Stephen sitting on the curb in handcuffs. Then he turned toward the officers again. "You might want to start explaining something, because the man you arrested," he pointed toward Stephen Smith, "is the reason she's still alive." The words from paramedic Nolan Velez hung in the air as he and his partner lifted Lauren Taylor onto the stretcher. Around them, the crowd inside Alton Baker Park had grown even larger. Phones were raised everywhere. Several people were still recording. Officer Scott Hollenbeck glanced around and suddenly realized how many cameras were pointed directly at him. "You all need to clear the area," he said loudly, but his voice no longer carried the same authority it had just minutes earlier. People weren't moving. One man stepped forward slightly, still holding his phone up. "You arrested the guy saving her life," he said bluntly. Another woman added from behind him, "and you sprayed him for it." Officer Tyler Babcock shifted uncomfortably beside the patrol car. On the curb, Stephen Smith sat with his wrists cuffed behind his back, his eyes still burning from the pepper spray. Atlas barked anxiously from the bench where Stephen had tied him earlier. Stephen looked toward the ambulance as the paramedics secured Lauren Taylor inside. He spoke quietly. "Did her pulse stabilize?" Paramedic Nolan Velez nodded while closing the ambulance doors. "For now," he said. Then he looked directly at the officers again. "You know he started CPR before we got here, right?" Neither officer answered. Velez shook his head. "You realize that's probably the only reason she made it this far." The ambulance lights flashed as it prepared to leave. Before stepping inside, Velez looked once more at Stephen. "Hang in there, Doc," he said. Then the ambulance pulled away toward the hospital. Silence lingered for a moment after it left. Then the crowd started talking again, louder this time. A man pointed directly at Officer Hollenbeck. "You didn't even check on her." Another voice followed. "You just assumed he did something wrong." Hollenbeck turned sharply. "That's enough," he snapped. But the crowd wasn't intimidated anymore. One woman held up her phone. "It's already online," she said. "Everything." Hollenbeck's face tightened. Across the curb, Stephen lifted his head slightly. "You might want to watch that video yourselves," he said calmly. Babcock looked down at him. "What video?" Stephen nodded toward the crowd. "The one showing what actually happened." Several witnesses raised their phones higher. One man spoke while still recording. "We got the whole thing. The CPR, the pepper spray, the tackle." Another added, "And the gun." Officer Scott Hollenbeck suddenly looked far less confident than when he first ran into the park. Across the scene, the tension shifted because what had just happened in the park wasn't staying there. The video had already started spreading, and within hours, people across Eugene were going to be watching exactly how two officers treated the man who saved Lauren Taylor's life. What they didn't know yet was that the footage would soon reach someone who specialized in cases exactly like this, a civil rights attorney, and the moment he saw it, he immediately made a call, one that would turn this park incident into a $2.1 million lawsuit. The video from Racine didn't stay local for long. Within hours of the incident, clips recorded by witnesses began circulating across social media in droves. The footage showed everything from the moment Stephen Smith was performing CPR on Lauren Taylor to the instant Officer Scott Hollenbeck ran toward him with his gun drawn. Another clip showed Officer Tyler Babcock spraying Stephen directly in the face with pepper spray before tackling him to the ground. And the cameras also captured something else that people online quickly noticed. While the officers were focused on restraining Stephen, Lauren Taylor was still lying motionless on the pavement. No one was helping her. By the next morning, local news stations were running the story. Reporters replayed the footage frame by frame. Witness interviews began appearing online, many of them repeating the same thing. Stephen Smith had been the first person to respond when Lauren Taylor collapsed, and according to paramedics, the CPR he started immediately was the reason she had regained a pulse before reaching the hospital. That information changed everything. At the hospital, doctors confirmed Lauren Taylor had suffered sudden cardiac arrest during her run. She survived the event and was later listed in stable condition. Meanwhile, the situation for the officers was getting worse. The police department opened an internal investigation after the video spread widely online. Body camera footage from both officers was also reviewed. What investigators saw matched what witnesses had already recorded. Stephen Smith had clearly identified himself as someone helping the woman. Multiple bystanders had shouted that he was performing CPR, but those warnings had been ignored. Within days, Officer Scott Hollenbeck and Officer Tyler Babcock were both placed on administrative leave while the investigation continued. That same week, Stephen Smith hired a civil rights attorney. The attorney held a press conference and addressed reporters directly. "My client stepped in to save a stranger's life," the attorney said. "Instead of receiving assistance, he was treated like a criminal." Soon after, a lawsuit was filed against the city seeking $2.1 million in damages for wrongful arrest, excessive force, and violation of civil rights. Facing mounting public scrutiny and the strength of the video evidence, the city eventually agreed to settle the case. Stephen Smith received the settlement. But when reporters later asked him about the incident, he didn't focus on the money. He spoke about something else. "I saw someone collapse. Anyone with the training I have would have done the same thing." Lauren Taylor later publicly thanked him for saving her life. A simple walk in the park had turned into a moment that exposed how quickly assumptions and bias can change the course of events. And if those witnesses hadn't pulled out their phones that day, the truth of what happened inside that park might have never been known. Stories like this remind us how important accountability and awareness really are. If you want more stories like this one, stories that reveal the moments many people never get to see, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like the video, and turn on notifications, because the next story might be even more unbelievable than this one.